Let's turn in our Bibles today to Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6. And we certainly honor fathers today being Father's Day. And so we want to focus on a father in particular. But just before we get into the reading today, I had read a little article or something. I think it was shared by Irma Bombeck, who had a mother apparently contact her and just asking, basically, how can I make sure that my son, who's just about to become a father, this was a single mother, and he's not really had his father involved. How does he know what a father is supposed to do? And of course, there's all sorts of ideas. Some of you fathers may have expectations of you at times. Some people just almost think that he's the one. I think that's the way Irma Bombeck shared it. That he's the one that brings the car around when it's raining, so that the rest of the family doesn't have to really get wet. And others may just think, oh, yeah, he's the one that takes the family pictures. Or he's the one who carves the Thanksgiving turkey. There's a variety of others also. He keeps the car gassed up. He mows the lawn. Maybe in some cases he tightens the clothesline when it's sagging or whatever. He does all those things. And that's maybe sometimes almost what people think a father's role is. He just takes care of some of those various issues. But obviously we know it's so much more than that. He shows up in the good times. He shows up, or it should be there always, but he's there in the good times. He's there in the bad times. He involves himself in his kids' lives. And obviously that's one key. It's not just what you tell them. It's what you show them. It's what you're being involved in their lives. And he shows how to handle adversity. He shows how to handle anger or disappointment. Also, he shows how to handle success as well. And so today we want to focus on fathers, but not necessarily in those areas. Obviously, we recognize there are the day-to-day grind things. But really, maybe I could ask you this question. Who controls the spiritual atmosphere in your home? Who controls that godly inclination in your home? Who leads the way in devotions? I know it's not always true, so please understand this. But just yesterday, I believe it was maybe on the trip home that we were listening to some things there and heard a fresh reminder how a children's inclination towards spiritual things is largely determined by his father. Now, obviously, mothers, I know you have a huge role. You're in the day-to-day training and all those things, but somehow or other, that spiritual role model as a father, they may hear, mothers, what you say, but they often go the direction that the father goes. I can't explain all that. It may be just the way God has established the home, but so many times, there's good Christian mothers. I've known them. They've maybe been even in the church here sometimes, but especially through my past, churches sometimes are made up by godly mothers, and yet so often the children go astray, and many times I would say it's the fault of the father who was not spiritually inclined. We need men, even today, even in our church, who will establish the right kind of influence for their children to follow. Be that example, that godly man in the home to say, this is the way we're going as a family. As we think about Father's Day today, maybe we'd even sort of look for an example. Well, who in Scripture could be the best example of godly fathering, the kind of man that we're talking about today? Who could it be? Well, there are a number of good men, and certainly I'm sure they probably try to do their best, but we don't know, in many cases, we don't know about their parenting skills. We don't know what they were like as a father. Now, there's some that we do know that, they were a good man from what we could tell, but they were a terrible father. Their children just went, especially some of the kings we might think of, that their children just went astray terribly. So where can we really go to find this? Maybe the patriarchs, maybe Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, except really, they were godly men apparently, but they even seemed to show favoritism, and there was sometimes some wrangling in the home, and so I don't know that that's really the best example. Obviously, Abraham's interaction with Isaac as far as ready to obey God and whatever it took on Mount Moriah. Yeah, that's a good example of godliness, I'm sure. But is that really the best, even throughout his life, some of the things in his life, was that the best example? Well, I don't know about that exactly. Job is another good man. And he even made sacrifices for his children. Sort of the idea that, Lord, if my children have somehow sinned and they've just kind of carelessly gone on, I'm making a sacrifice for them. I don't know all about that as far as how God viewed that, but that was his attitude, his mindset. Lord, I'm giving you a sacrifice here. Please overlook any potential sin of my children. I don't know just how they're maybe each day what they're living like, and so I want to be sure that they are covered. Good example in many ways. But I feel like maybe I'd like to kind of focus. I've already given you the scripture today, Genesis chapter 6. I'd like to focus on Noah, who is the upright father. Noah, here in chapter 6 of Genesis and verse number 5. Genesis chapter 6 and verse number 5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and the creeping thing and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. And so when we read that little passage right there, we see that Noah was a man of integrity, a man of godliness. And as we think about this a little bit, there are several things we could just have kind of come to the surface right away in his situation there. Of course, we'll talk about that parenting issue. But who did Noah save? Who was he able to get rescued in the ark? Nobody but his family. Nobody but his family. And yet, we would look back at Noah and think, what a hero, what a great man, what a success. He was just and righteous before God, and he saved his family. And really, today, fathers, I'm not trying to be too hard on us, but that is our ultimate goal. And it's not just about harping on certain issues and trying to make sure that they do things just like we say, but it's living a life of godliness. Obviously, if they're in our home, if we have they're being raised at our feet, so to speak, we have a job to tell them this is the way we live. This is what God expects. This is how we need to be sure we're being careful to walk with God. And yet beyond, when they leave home, when they go and they're making their choices and they're leading their families, we have the obligation to continue, even at that point, to be the example, take the way of God and be the man that they can follow in their own home. The testimony, the example that we are to them, even after they're up and gone. But let's look at several aspects here today. Won't take very long on it, perhaps, but I want to at least draw it to your attention. You can think about Noah and his family example there as a father, even today as we focus on fathers a little bit. First of all, his personal godliness. Number one, beyond anything else, fathers, your job is to be holy. Your job is to be godly, righteous, and upright, and consistent, careful in your daily life. Your job is to follow after God so your children can follow after you. Don't try to tell them to do things that you're not consistent about training them in or living yourselves. But instead, we need to be personally godly. And I really don't know of anybody with a much higher rank, if you want to say it that way, in godly living than what we find right here concerning Noah. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And then verse number 9, Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. If you don't get anything else from the message today, if you will simply live verse number 9 and be faithful and consistent and holy, then it'll be a success. You will be a success. You will be the father you ought to be. What more could we ask for than that they are, or that you and I are just and perfect and we walk with God? No, that's just not talking about, fatherly perfection necessarily. It's talking about having a perfect heart to go with God and perfectly devoted to God. Not that you never make a mistake. I know sometimes we might think, well, what does it take to be a good father? Sometimes our families will remember us, even as time goes on. It sort of that kind of covers the mistakes that we've made, and they think, oh yeah, you were a good dad, and they love us. And so it's easy to kind of overlook some failures or faults in us, perhaps. But really, when it really comes down to it, could they say he had a heart perfect before God? A heart to do what God wants him to do. Not wishy-washy, not up and down, not straying here and there, not just kind of doing what came easy, but he was perfectly devoted to God. May not have always done things perfectly, but his heart was perfect before God. He wanted to do what God wanted him to do. What about our personal godliness? Can we be described even like Noah was here? God obviously was seeing a world that deserved destruction. Wicked, wicked, wicked. It says here he repented that he made them. But he couldn't help noticing there was a man with an unmistakable difference. A man who had chosen to go with God, no matter what the cost, even over 120 years of mocking and laughing at him and his neighbors just even sometimes maybe ignoring his messages or worse, just making fun and criticizing. But God knew Noah. I'm sure, obviously, we see here Noah found grace. It's not like God had to, he's trying to hunt all over the earth. Who could I find that might be able to somehow be worthy to take on this job of preparing an escape? Who could build the ark? I don't think it's that at all. God probably was hearing from Noah frequently. God knew Noah. Noah was walking with God. So this is not like he's some stranger and God somehow just happened to find him. But he was consistent in his personal godliness. God knew Noah. Does God know you to be a faithful, consistent man in your family? Well, it's a pretty high call, but it's what we're called to be and do. His personal godliness. Not only that, but we might call the second aspect his persistent gospel. And Noah demonstrates probably pretty highly what we even need most in our day. One common question, I think this would be sort of more of a Bible trivia thing, but many of you would know, how long did he preach? How long was he busy building the ark? It was 120 years. And through all those dark days, all the laughing, all the mocking, the reputation, negative reputation that he had earned for being a crazy man or whatever. We're just sort of reading between the lines, but you could sort of suppose that. But even though his news was laughed at and mocked by his unbelieving neighbors, Noah was persistent in telling them the story, telling them the message. God had a way of escape from destruction. You don't have to perish. Judgment is coming. A flood is coming. As much as you may laugh and scorn, this is your hope. And he just kept at it and kept at it and kept at it. Verse 22 tells us how Noah did everything that God had told him. Let me read it to you properly. Thus did Noah, according to all that God commanded him, so did he. He just did what God expected, what God had asked him. He was supposed to build a boat of escape or of refuge. But he was also supposed to preach the gospel. If you want to call it that, obviously we think of the gospel in the New Testament after Jesus came, but this is sort of the good news of hope and escape. And he kept it up. For all that long time of building and preaching, Noah was consistent. Kept on preaching, working to please God. Many times we may almost feel like we've just, we wore out. We've come to the end. I'm just tired of the battle. I'm tired of pushing on. I'm tired of praying. I'm tired of trying to be the example. We just got to somehow sort of buck up and take it, as we say. You just got to press on. Keep doing what you ought to do. Persist in leading the way. That doesn't mean that we just are just constantly hounding people, but it does mean that we just keep up that faithful walk, offering a way of escape, offering the hope of salvation, offering the way to God, showing them this is a way worth living. And so often our families are watching us. We've already kind of dealt with that a little bit, but let's just keep on persisting in godliness and the gospel message. Let's touch a little bit now on even the parenting aspect, because there was what I'm calling his parental guidance. And one important thing to me, at least, and I understand not everybody sees everything the same way, but in my mind, and I believe that it's part of our stewardship, a part of our responsibility, is that our greatest responsibility, besides seeing our own soul saved and ready to go to heaven, is taking our family with us. And so really, when we start thinking about it, one of the most important things about Noah is that he saved his family even when nobody else went into the ark, when nobody else seemed to care, when nobody else was with him there. But he did take his family. Now, I understand there may be some aspect here that was cultural. He's the patriarch. He's the head of the family. What he says goes, perhaps. I don't know about all that, but somehow or other, he was able to take his family with him. They apparently believed him, or at least submitted to him. And really, I can't think of much better praise than to acknowledge that he was successful when it came to his family. And I understand everybody has their choice to make, but oh, that God would help us as fathers to carry the burden. Sometimes we can maybe almost, I know I've experienced this even just recently. Maybe there's certain things in my family, my children, as they've grown, maybe there's certain things that's not just exactly what I would do, or we just felt like that wasn't wise. Part of it, I'll just throw this in, but some of the social media stuff, just you better stay away from some of that stuff. There's some dangers there and whatever, but it's not, not all of them have necessarily followed that specifically. And I could sort of try to put them on a guilt trip. You ought to be doing this. You shouldn't do that. And I've tried to raise them with godly principles, and there's a place where I have to say, this is still what I'm going to do. But you have to make your choice before God, what you think is appropriate. And, there's some reasons for some of that. Stephanie with her Amish ministry and all those things. So there's some issues there. And I have to be able to say, okay, I'm not just going to keep hounding this. I'm not going to just keep harping on this. This is where I stand, and you just allow God to direct your steps and allow God to help you. But there is a part there where we do need to stand up and say, this is what I'm going to live. This is what we believe. This is what God's word says. And so in this case, of course, Noah was able to get his family in the ark. I know some people would almost have the idea, well, just you put it out there and you just let them do whatever they decide. I don't think that either one of those issues, either micromanaging everything or just saying, well, you do whatever you please, is the right way. But a push in the right direction and helping them to desire God and to be what he wants them to be. And a big part of that is that I have to be what I'm supposed to be so that they want to follow my footsteps. Not just that I tell them you got to do this, but that I say, I'm going to go with God. And there's such a sweetness about me, about, of course, obviously not just a father, but mother and throughout the family, that we have a sweetness about us that others of the family want to follow our footsteps. God help us in our parental guidance. I have a feeling that there was an aspect there, yes, probably some responsibility. The boys very likely had helped with the ark as well. But there was probably a consistency about Noah, and they knew he walks with God. And if he says that God spoke to him, I believe him because I know Dad. I know that he knows God. And when he tells me that God said this, I know it's true. Perhaps that was a big part of it. May God help us, whatever the reason, that our children would follow us, that we're at least consistent and we're walking with God. We're a success as we take our children with us to heaven. Parental guidance. The last one I'll notice with you is maybe just a little bit unique, but I want to just touch quickly on his patient gratitude. His patient gratitude. Now, some of you might see Noah as a little bit of a comrade of like mind. You feel a little bit like Noah perhaps because, oh yeah, he was rejoicing the fact that his family was safe and that God had brought them into the ark and provided a way of escape. And wow, this is wonderful. But don't forget, it wasn't just 3 days. It wasn't just a week or a month. It was a long time. Something over the whole period of time, something like a year, that they were in the boat. And so as they're there waiting for rescue and they start to get on one another's nerves, or the animals are extra loud today, or the smell is terrible. All those things, the sort of the cares of life, those things that, oh, Lord, I'm thankful for all you've done, but boy, it looks bad today. I'm having a rough time today. My nerves are on edge. Can you just imagine the strain of staying in the ark for as long as they did? Very likely Noah was the one that had to listen to the complaints. He's the one that preached the message. He was the one that had led the way for his family. Maybe he had to listen to the complaints, but I'm sure that he also was looking to God, even in the ark, even day after day, saying, Lord, you sent me here. Help me to stay patient. Help me to keep thankful for what you've done. Don't let me get in bad spirits. Don't let me get cantankerous or whatever the word is that you'd like to use there. Just, again, my nerves edge or whatever. God had saved him and those that had trusted in the message. And Noah had confidence that God was going to also bring them through on the other side. And of course, we obviously see that. We don't necessarily read a lot about that right here in the passage, but we do see when he came out of the ark, what was one of the first things he did? He built an altar. God smelled that sweet savor, that sweet smell coming up from the sacrifice that had been made of thanksgiving. God gave the rainbow to say, I'm never going to destroy the earth with a flood again. God was pleased that Noah had faithfully come through, even those trials in the ark for all that time. Darkness to a large degree, I would suppose. I don't know all the details there, but probably a lot of darkness. There's probably some pretty rough times. May have helped in some ways. Maybe some of the animals were able to hibernate during that dark period. Whatever. There's a lot of other issues there. That's not our focus today. The point is that thanksgiving flowed freely as his patience was rewarded, and God brought him safely out the other side. His patient gratitude. So let me just kind of wrap it up today. Fathers, we've been focusing especially on you. I don't expect a flood anytime soon. Of course, God promised with that rainbow that he would never destroy the earth with a flood. But I do hope, flood or fire or whatever else, I hope that we would have men right here, right in our church, that would be like Noah. Even with no water to worry about. That we would just say, we're going with God. We're going to lead the way. We're going to pray for our family. We're going to show the example, the testimony. And let me just ask you this question to bring it to a close. What are your children catching from you, fathers? What are they catching from you? Are they seeing personal godliness in your life? Are they seeing that you strive for that? Are they seeing consistency in example and message? Do they see a patient trust that just even when things go bad, they see your faith is firm? They see that you're still consistent. You're still faithful to God. God knows every part, every challenge of a father's life. Obviously, God is our Father. And today, I do offer, or say, God bless you. Offer my support to you, or however you want to say that. But don't forget that God is our ultimate example. And while Noah is a wonderful example of godliness, God is also our example of faithfulness and kindness and love and sacrifice. And so as we go our way today, let's ask God to help us to be the men, the fathers that we ought to be, with personal godliness, a faithful testimony right along the way, making a difference as we sort of, maybe you don't preach necessarily, but you're, in a sense, your life is preaching a gospel. As you guide your families, may God help us to be the men that He requires us to be, as the head of our home, as the example our families can follow.